Hello everyone. Today I will tell you a true horror story from a Japanese netizen. It was about 28 to 29 years ago. After I graduated from high school, I got a job in Saitama. It's a prefecture in Japan which neighbors Tokyo. I got a second-hand car after a couple of months of moving to Saitama. You really need it out there. I was glad I bought one. I used to go on long relaxing drives. After work I would listen to my music and smoke cigarettes. I really enjoyed it. Obviously, that was until the night in question. One night I was on a particularly long drive. I was way out in the mountains. There wasn't much but darkness and the sound of cicadas all around me. I drove with the windows down. Well, at least one window. The driver's side window, since I was usually smoking. I was heading along this dark road and I heard a scream. It wasn't an adult scream. It sounded like a kid's scream. It was blood-curdling. I don't want to talk about it much, because I can still hear it in my mind as I type these words. But trust me, if you heard something like that, you'd do what I did, slam on the brakes. It was instinctive. I wasn't a believer in the paranormal or anything like that. I put a lot of faith into my five senses and I felt like something was happening out here. So I pulled over onto the hard shoulder and got out of the car. I felt chills rise up my spine. It was the dead of night and there was no reason why I should have heard what I heard. I scanned the area as best I could. My car's headlights lit up the dark woods ahead of me, but there was darkness in all other directions. I began to sweat. I was worried, scared, nervous, paranoid, you name it. I was overcome by some terrible dread. What made that sound? Was someone in danger? I was wondering. My legs began to tremble. I thought that was just a thing that people say, but it's pretty true. I couldn't hear anything apart from my heartbeat and the restless shuffle of my feet on the dirt road. I was panicked. I wanted to leave. I managed to convince myself that it was just an auditory hallucination. Maybe I was staying up too late or something. I didn't hear anything else after that initial scream, so I thought that I could just go. So I headed back home. About 3 weeks later I was watching TV, and the same roads and the same mountain passes came up on the screen. The newscaster said the words that I will never forget: Miyazaki has confessed to the murder and identified the scene of the crime to the authorities. The case had already proceeded to the courts. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I knew that the scream I heard was not happening in real time. Yet perhaps it was some distant echo of the past. That scream wasn't one you'd hear in an amusement park, or if somebody startled someone. That was an end-of-life scream. I saw on screen the exact area I pulled over. It was truly disturbing to imagine what happened there. I didn't have to imagine, because after the trial, months later, the guy's actions were very well documented by media and himself. If you don't want to sleep tonight, you can look up the crimes of Tsutomu Miyazaki, but I will not give him the recognition here. What he did truly turns my stomach. You'll understand why that scream scared me so much. I stopped going for night drives in the woods after that. This happened a few years ago, but I still remember it as if it was yesterday. I will never forget what I saw that night. I was at home doing nothing, in particular when my friend called. He said he wanted to get out of his house and asked if I wanted to hang out. I thought, why not? This was about 3 a.m. and I'm not even sure why I was still awake. But I was. He said he would come and pick me up in his car. We were driving around the city for a while and my friend suddenly said, "Hey, let's go to the wharf." So that's where we headed. Down by the pier area by the wharf. There's an old factory. In the daytime, trucks are in and out of there all the time. It's a pretty busy area, but at night it was quiet. The roads by the wharf are really wide and straight. On weeknights you can sometimes see people racing there, but that night we were the only ones on the road. It made for quite a tense atmosphere. We headed to the wharf like we were being drawn there. We stopped at a traffic light and the car pulled up alongside us. I can't remember the model or the color of the car. I guess it was more like a minivan than a car. Come to think of it. Either way, it was bigger than a normal car. I'm in the passenger seat and my friend is driving. The light changes color and I look at the car and the people in it. I got a really weird vibe from one of the guys in the car, so I kept watching. I couldn't put a finger on what was weirding me out about these guys at first, but then I noticed one of the guys in the back seat. I could do a little else, but wonder what was bugging me. Then it dawned on me. The reason I felt something was off about one of the guys was because I couldn't see the bottom half of his face. It was as if it was completely black, like it was missing. Why was it black? I wondered. I thought I was hallucinating or if I was just overly tired. Still, I kept looking at the guy. I was curious. I locked eyes with him and then the car sped away before the lights changed. They ran the red light. In this split second I saw the guy. His eyes flashed my way. I had never seen the look of such desperation before or since. His eyes seemed to scream at me. He pressed his face against the window and then it was like he was pulled backwards before the car sped off. When he was close against the window, I realized the black thing I saw was covering his mouth. It all happened in less than a couple of seconds. The look of fear in his eyes stayed with me. I was deeply concerned. The minivan sped away into the night towards the war. I had heard rumors that the Yakuza used to hang out there and are responsible for some of the missing person cases in the area and for some of the bodies that are found washed up in the wharf over the years. Some people say the wharf is haunted because of this too. It's always been known as a kind of test of courage to head there at night on the weekends. But I have never spoken to anyone who went down there on a weekday night. We don't know what goes on down there when the town sleeps, but I think I saw a glimpse of it that night. Could this be a prank? I really hope that it was what I saw. I guess that's the only outcome I can live with. I didn't get the license plate and we didn't follow the van. It just happened so quickly. Now I'm older. I know that if I saw it again I would be more proactive. This weighs heavily on me still to this day. I told the police a day or two after it happened and I never heard back from them. When I think back to that dark summer night and those split seconds, I saw the man with desperation in his eyes and tape covering his mouth. I can't help but shadow. This happened when I was in college. I was in a band back in those days and I used to practice almost every night of the week with my bandmates. It was summer and we had practiced most of the night. It was sweltering out. The studio we used was really far from my dorm and since I was in college I would usually take the bus home. I missed the last bus of the night, so I had no alternative but to hail a taxi. I had my guitar with me. I took it down off my back. As the taxi pulled over, I remember thinking, what a waste of money, and I cursed myself for missing the last bus. The driver gave me a nod as I entered his car. He looked to be in his 50s. He was blasting his aircon and I was grateful for that. I told him my street and we south. "Ah, you live on that street. You must be a student." "Oh yeah, that's right." "Hey, there's a bowling alley on that street." You know, I never liked bowling much myself, but when I went on a company outing, I really enjoyed it. "Ah, is that right?" I replied. I was pretty tired from practice, so I didn't feel like talking all that much. I kept smiling and nodding. Every time he looked at me in his rearview mirror. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I kept giving him verbal cues that I was listening. You know, like etc. etc. He seemed to enjoy chatting. It started getting a little strange. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. He kept looking at me and telling me more and more about his life. He was going off on different tangents and his stories weren't making sense. I stopped replying to him after a while and he just kept on talking like he was talking to himself. Then, after a while, He stopped and said, "Oh, by the way, the address you gave me. I know that street. You must be a student." "Oh yeah. Hey, there's a bowling alley near that street. I've never bowled a game in my life. It looks like a good place to do it." I went silent. "Oh, by the way, the address you gave me. I know that street. You must be a student, huh? Let me tell you, there's a great bowling alley near your street. I'm a big bowling fan. I go almost every weekend." "Are you? You know what? That's a nice street." "Oh, you said you're a student, right?" He kept looping the same contented questions, kept repeating again and again. I thought that he seemed a little too young to be this forgetful. It was really eerie. I felt very uncomfortable. I didn't even answer him. He was still talking in circles. It might sound quite funny and it might even make you laugh, but it was really weird. I was locked in the taxi with him driving around in the dead of night and he was acting incredibly odd. I remember feeling sweat trickle down my spine, despite the car being so cold. Each time he looked at me in the mirror, it seemed like his smile got more maniacal. His eyes stayed locked on mine and he finally stopped repeating the same sentences. The silence was worse somehow. Then he started stamping his left foot down. Repeatedly. The sound of its impact resounded in the taxi. I stiffened up like I was bracing for something he wouldn't stop. I was terrified of what was about to happen. Next he started screaming and shouting, which then slowly dissolved into a low groan-like sound. He started fidgeting in his seat and I felt sweat beading on my brow. He looked in the mirror one more time and said, "By the way, the address you gave me. I know that street. You must be a student, huh?" He smiled a different smile at me. It was sinister. He went from being weird and creepy to someone I was actually frightened of. My life was essentially in this guy's hands. The taxi speed was rising. He was getting reckless every turn. He did seem to be so abrasive. Like the car was shaking from left to right and I was feeling every turn in the road. Other cars were honking their horns. He rode the sidewalk at times and he cut in front of other motorists. I was really frightened and absolutely stunned by what was happening. I know that in some of the bigger cities, some of the taxi drivers are a bit more aggressive, but this was something else. I started to believe that I was gonna die. I wanted to scream at him, "Slow down," but I couldn't. It was as if my heart was in my mouth. I understood those silent screams you see in the movies. I also didn't want to do anything to throw the driver off. I mean, what if I said something that made him more erratic? I was just sat back there as still as a statue, frightened to make the slightest of movements. I thought that if I just shut up and didn't bother the guy, then I would get home in one piece. But then he took a different turning, which clearly leads away from my street, the street that he apparently seemed to know so well. I was reaching my limits. I heard myself call out, "Slow down, slow down. He is fine." Then, surprisingly, the driver seemed to snap back to reality. "Oh, isn't it a bit far from your place?" He seemed perfectly normal as he pulled the taxi over. "Hey, sorry for talking so much. It's one of my bad habits. I guess I'm a bit of a chatty guy." He then calmly told me the price. I was staring at him wondering if, for some reason, he wasn't aware of what just happened. I was staggered by how he just went back to being a regular taxi driver. I felt like I had just dreamed the whole thing like it was some insane daydream. I handed over the money and the door is unlocked. "Thank you." I snatched up my guitar and I began to back away from his car. "Oh, sir," he called. I paused. "You must be a student if you live on that street, right?" I just nodded and walked off. I went directly to a friend's house and told them what happened, and my experience with the taxi driver just made them laugh. I felt stupid, but now I don't care. It was scary for me, and he might still be driving around out there to this day. It was a night I'll never forget. Hey, if you ever get to Kyoto and you need a taxi, be careful. Since I was a kid, I have always wanted to drive, and when I was in school, I wanted to be one of the first of my friends to have their own riding license and a car. I worked a part-time job in high school and I saved every penny I made. I was set on my goal of getting a car. When I got to the second year of college, I could finally afford my own car and I passed all my driving tests. I was unbelievably proud to own my own car, even though it was secondhand. It was a sedan and a bit of a dinosaur. Hybrids were coming out and newer cars had better gas consumption rates, but I didn't care. I worked hard for that car and I loved it, even if it was a gas guzzler. I was okay with not having the most popular car amongst my friends. I got ripped on by some of my friends for driving an old man car, but hey, they didn't complain. When they needed a ride, I always drove safe. By the way, I didn't want to damage my car or lose my license. I didn't use it all that much in the beginning. I don't know why, but maybe I was nervous anyway. After about a year, I got used to driving alone for longer periods. I remember one night feeling a bit more confident than usual. So after I finished my shift, I dumped my things at home and took my car out for a long solo drive. This was at about 10 p.m. I had no destination in mind. I was happy as long as there was a road ahead of me. I went through residential areas and down roads I hadn't been down before in my town. It was pretty cool. I was finally enjoying the sense of freedom I always thought I would have by owning a car, and that's when I heard it. There was a dull thudding sound coming from behind me. I was worried that I'd run over something. It sounded like something had happened to one of my rear tires. Maybe I accidentally rode up onto the car. No, that wasn't it. While I was considering the options, I heard the sound again. It was that same dull thudding sound coming from the same place behind me. So I pulled over at the end of the road and I got out and checked. I could not find anything wrong with the car. The tires were in great condition. Next I checked the trunk. All the maintenance supplies I had in there hadn't fallen over. I looked into the dark trunk and felt something strange. I have no reason as to why something felt so strange, but it just did. The dark, empty white trunk was staring at me and I felt something similar to nausea. Time to go home. I thought I shut the trunk and hopped back in the car on the drive back. It felt like someone was staring at me from back there. I didn't use the car for a few days. After that I was busy working with tests at college. When the tests were over, I got a call from one of my friends asking if you could come over for a night drive with me. He said he would even pay for gas. I remembered the weird thudding sound and the strange feeling of being watched from the last time I'd gone for a drive, and I hesitated for a moment. I told myself I was worrying about nothing to go out and enjoy driving with my friends. I picked my friend up in front of the train station. I was wondering how far we would dare to drive that night. The night was rich with possibility. He got in and we were driving along talking about nothing in particular. We were just joking around and having a laugh. I was wide awake and enjoying myself. I could see her staying up all night. I set the satellite navigation to avoid toll roads and we just drove wherever the roads took us. After a while, I've realized my friend had gone quiet on me. I asked him if he was feeling carsick, since we'd gone through a few winding, dark roads. He said that he wasn't carsick though, and then he asked, "Is everything okay? You know, listen that first, with your car." I was curious as to what he was implying, because, in my mind, when you ask someone if everything is okay with their car, you're kind of asking, is everything all right with your driving? Well, that's how it felt. There was nothing wrong with my driving of the car. I thought the engine and the brakes were in great shape. I just replied, telling him I'd recently had the car serviced and there were no issues. And he surprised me by saying, "It's just that I heard this banging sound coming from the back." I said to my friend that I heard some noises coming from the trunk before he seemed a little worried. So I said that we would pull over and take a look just to put his mind at rest. By the way, in case you haven't guessed it yet, I'm not talking about the same friend as before. I was sick of these noises at this point, so I was more than happy to show him what I already knew. There was nothing in the trunk that was out of the ordinary. Still, when I opened the trunk, I felt that strange, dark atmosphere leak out of there. The air suddenly seemed cold and unpleasant. My friend pulled out a small flashlight attached to his keychain and he illuminated the trunk. It looked as I expected. All the maintenance things I had in there were still in order and not toppled. "Look, there seems to be something wrong back here." He said. His face was painted a ghastly shade of wine. He showed the torch all around the trunk. "That doesn't look right. Looks like something's leaking, man." He said. I was confused. There appeared to be some sort of leak. The gray interior of the trunk had now turned a dark reddish-brown color. It didn't look like an oil leak, and I know I'm not a professional, but I've never heard of an oil leak in the trunk before. My friend looked me in the eye and asked, "Is that blood?" I had no words for him. It sure looked like it, but I knew it couldn't be possible. I didn't say a word about it. I just said I wanted to go home. All the while I felt that same uneasy feeling of someone looking at me while we drove home. I didn't exchange many words with my friend. The atmosphere felt heavy. I put the car in the market after that, and I was grateful to find it buy it quickly. There was something off with that car. What was it used for in the past? Who was the previous owner, and what happened in the trunk? All questions I would love to answer, but I know I will never get those answers. My hobby is fishing and I own an old car. Great introduction. Right. I usually go fishing about 2 or 3 times a month and I drive through countless mountain roads. My car doesn't have a radio or aircon. I usually listen to the radio on a smartphone through an app. Since my car is so old, it makes a ton of noise and I can never hear the radio clearly enough. I don't want to use headphones because that's dangerous. It's pretty lonely driving through the woods and the mountain roads in the dark. So I always put the radio app on for some BGM. Each radio personality has a different voice and a different rate of speed. I could always hear the baseball announcers clearer than the entertainment show guys. Due to the noise, my car was kicking out. Well, it all started at about 2:30 am. I was driving through a mountain road and I heard a woman's voice distinctly and abruptly ask, "Can you hear me?" I thought that it could be like a section of the radio show, like I don't know, like the listener's voice. "Can you hear me?" Something like a jingle. Right? I didn't pay it much mind. But about 2 weeks later I heard the same voice ask the same thing. I paid close attention this time. I checked the app and the station I was listening to was the same as last time. And it was also around the same time in the morning, 2:30 am. On one fishing trip I had a particularly big catch, so I was heading over to a friend's place to share the catch with him. We were talking about all sorts of things and I happened to mention the whole "can you hear me" thing. While we were drinking, he was convinced that the voice belonged to some sort of lost wandering soul. By the way, my friend is an office worker who graduated from a Buddhist university. He's a very spiritual guy. He seemed interested in my experience. I ended up laughing the whole thing off since we were drunk and I headed home. I thought that this would be the last I heard of it, but the next day I got an email from my friend. "The next time you go fishing and you drive past the place, you heard that voice play this." It said he attached some audio to the email and it was a recording of him preaching or some sort of message for this supposed wandering soul. I didn't listen to it much. I liked him better when he was less serious. The following weekend I planned to do some fishing again. I passed along that road. I had heard the voice, so I played his audio as he requested. I didn't care because, like I said, I could barely hear anything over the noise of my car as I was driving. But I noticed a lot of static. There was definitely some sort of radio interference. I didn't hear the woman's voice, though I felt like I had the answer I needed. It was just some sort of radio wave thing and just a coincidence. It happened in the same area at the same time of night. Over the coming weeks and months, each time I drove through that area, I was still curious and partially loyal to my ever-believing friend. I couldn't help myself. I kept playing his sermon like recording whenever I drove down that road, and this is where things get weird. You can hear me. You can. I heard a woman say that over the recording of my friend's audio file. I was absolutely terrified and dumbstruck. It was the strangest thing I've ever experienced. It was like a baby monitor. The voice came and went in an instant. I remember I went home that night and listened to the recording over again just to make sure that it wasn't something like my friend's TV on in the background that could have caused that sound. Or if he was messing with me. And I hadn't noticed until that night. The recording contained nothing but his voice. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. And it didn't glitch out once when I was playing it at home. I went and saw my friend the next day and told him about what I had heard. And he asked me to take him there as soon as I could. So the following Sunday, I picked him up and the idiot was wearing his suit and holding some flowers. I chuckled to myself, but I didn't put him down. He seemed really serious. We went out to the area, and I pointed it out to him. He gets out of the car where I heard the voice, and he placed some flowers by the side of the road. He asked me to join hands with him, and I did. It seemed to mean something more to him than it did to me. It was dark and all I could hear was the sounds of nature all around me. The wind rustling through the leaves of the trees was relaxing. It seemed to make a sighing sound. He said, "You can go now," while he had his eyes tightly shut. And that was that. We decided to head home for a drink. I asked him about what he was trying to do. I don't know. I just wanted. I wanted to feel something, but I didn't feel anything. I thought that I would just say something instead. I don't know. Okay. I was smiling. He's got a good heart. I just kept saying, "Don't follow us home again and again." To be honest, I was grateful for that. I have driven along that road countless times since and I haven't had any more experiences. You must be a student if you live on that street, right?